So I have a theory that I've concocted, and I want to run it by you and get your thoughts. So when it comes to George McCaskey, I've been pretty critical, I think, of McCaskies all my life, or most of my life. But I am, to George's credit, he is a genuinely a nice person, and I think deep in his bones, he is a Bears fan. But when it comes to George, and you have said this, I feel like a lot of times that George is just cosplaying in this world. Like he is. So you bring in a Kevin Warren, and Kevin Warren has his plus and minuses and things like that. Like I think a real huge minus is that we don't even get a harbor conversation because those two guys, hate each other. But Kevin Warren does have a pretty great resume. So I have this theory that, and other people have brought this up, that I think George has finally come around, and I think that we're going for broke with this. And I think one of the catalysts of the Bears going for broke is the day that those fans were yelling, "Sell the team," yelling it at George McCaskey, and he pretended that he didn't hear it. He heard it. That's in his head. And I don't think that's ever happened to him before. So I think shortly after, when Kevin Warren was like, look, we got to fire people. You got to start spending some money. I think George finally went, okay. What do you think?
So I'm in agreement with you. Everything that I've heard about George McCaskey is that he is a very decent man, a very good person, and truly a Chicago Bears fan. Those aren't prerequisite ingredients to making you a good chairman of the board, as we've seen over the years. And I'm with you where I am very torn about how I feel about Kevin Warren at times. For me personally, I did the rant on here. I don't appreciate him pandering to us and patronizing us and telling us that we're the best fans in the world. And then, you know what I mean, giving us a warm glass of milk and a pat on the head. I don't need it. Personally, I don't need it. I think it's a little tone deaf towards the Chicago Bears fan base, and I don't appreciate it. But I have heard what you have heard, that Kevin Warren has been integral in this last coaching cycle. That I think when we find out how much Ben Johnson is going to be making as the Chicago Bears head coach, and we're taping this a couple days before you're listening to this here on WLS AM 890 on Saturday night. So maybe those numbers are out already, but they're coming to the table and they're acting like big boys when it comes to hiring Ben Johnson, when it comes to probably tossing out a couple million to bring in Dennis Allen, to pay a little bit extra probably to bring in an Antoine Randall, associate head coach, wide receivers coach, a JT Barrett, a quarterbacks coach, Declan Doyle, offensive coordinator, and so on. So I applaud them for wanting to get serious in that regard to get this turned around. Obviously, in sports, we see it with the Chicago Cubs right now. Jed Hoyer's on a kind of a walk-year deal, so he's trying to do everything he can, albeit within his own power, I guess, to try and put a winning product on the field for the Chicago Cubs, and maybe George is feeling a little bit of that pressure too as well. But I think the big one is, John, and I think it might just have a little bit to do with the fortuitous nature of timing, is that the Chicago Bears, within probably the next 2 years, maybe 3, but I'm going to go with 2. So I'm going to say maybe 2027. The Chicago Bears are going to have a new stadium somewhere. I don't know if it's going to be in Chicago. I don't know if it's going to be in Arlington Heights. That debate and that conversation is irrelevant. But in my opinion, they are going to have a brand new stadium that's going to open it up. So I've seen this in other sports before. We can look down the street a mile and a half away from where I am looking at with Northwestern right now. They're opening up a new stadium, hopefully in 2026. And there's a period of time when you go out and you want to have this venture of building a new stadium where it isn't important or incumbent upon you to make the football team very good. Actually, in some cases, you're better off kicking the can down the road while you build this thing and kind of sort of like biding your time a little bit while you get it ready. But I will tell you this. Once that stadium opens up, you damn sure better make sure that George McCaskey isn't hearing fans chanting, "Sell the team," on week 1 of the inauguration of that stadium opening up. All right. There is a synergy here that has to happen. And that synergy is the Chicago Bears need to be at least competent as a football team when that stadium opens up. When that stadium opens up, they cannot be a 4-win football team. They cannot have Chicago Bears fans wearing brown paper bags over their heads, or they are chanting, like you said, "Sell the team to George." They simply can't have that happen, okay? They're putting way too much money into this thing. And I'm not saying that the stadium is going to be empty, but they need, from just a concept of what they're trying to pull off, they do need to have Bears fans excited and a little bit of frothing at the mouth to check out this new stadium. And it would probably behoove them and be in their best interest to have the football team be competent and, in my personal opinion and my preference, a playoff team and competing for Super Bowls. So I applaud George for stepping up to the plate, for spending the big money on Ben Johnson. We'll see if they're going to have over $70 million in cap space in the offseason. A lot of NFL insiders are already tying the Chicago Bears to Pro Bowl guard on the Kansas City Chiefs, Trey Smith, Pro Bowl center Dan Dahlman for the Atlanta Falcons, that they might spend buku bucks in the offensive line, something that they've never done as a franchise. I'm rooting for it. I think it's great, but I do find it's a little convenient and a little bit more than a coincidence that the Chicago Bears are going to try really hard to get really good in the next 2 years, so that when that stadium opens up, the Chicago Bears are a competitive product, an entertaining product, and something that Chicago Bears fans are going to be excited for, because they're going to have to pay those premiums, John, and those licensing deals for those season tickets, right? That will go hand in hand. And I know for years the Chicago Bears have always been, well, the legacy, the brand, Hallis, the 85 Bears, duh Bears, minimum, whatever, all that stuff for years. But they also have to be really careful that they secure this in the next couple of years. So hopefully that's good news for Chicago Bears fans, right? Hopefully that the new stadium means a stimulating, entertaining product on the field, because they simply can't have what they just had last year heading into whatever new stadium they open up in the next 2 years.
Number one, if we win that Washington game, do we get a better record? And adding to that, maybe we should be thankful for the Washington game, because if we get a better record, we don't hit rock
get a new
bottom
coach
and get a new coach.
So the thing that I'm always going to look back on when it comes to the Washington game and the Fail Mary was that I watched it at a bar called Almost Home in Wrigleyville. I watched it with former Bears defensive end Corey Wooten, who I've done shows with for many years. And we don't get a chance to see each other a lot in person, and we don't get to watch games a ton together. And so it was really cool to be around him for that game. Watched it with my wife. And honestly, that game was very typical to a lot of the Chicago Bears football we had sort of seen most of that year up to that point, was just dreadful, dreadful offense. And then in the fourth quarter, a little bit of some life, right? Mm-hmm. And again, I love talking about sliding doors moments here in Chicago, right? But, Chris Conte doesn't blow a coverage. We look at Jay Cutler differently because he threw a go-ahead touchdown against Aaron Rodgers in the fourth quarter. We look at Mitch Trubisky differently if the double doink doesn't happen, because Mitch was bad that whole game but led us down a great drive in that moment to put us in a position to win a playoff game. Something you can never take away from him, right? All the Mitch detractors out there. And in this moment, too, as well, was a moment when Caleb Williams, a rookie quarterback, versus Jaden Daniels, who everyone's having this fun little Jaden versus Caleb conversation right now. Caleb in the fourth quarter comes out and he completely outduels, in that moment, right? Outduels Jaden Daniels and puts his team up, and we take the lead and lock it in, right? We're 5-2. Now, the thing that I will never forget is that when that happened and the game was over, I was outside, bunch of Bears fans, everyone's a little tuned up, right? Everyone's had a couple too many pops. Everyone's super upset, blaming this person, blaming this person, blaming that person. I can't help but thinking, and I told these people, I was like, look, the Fail Mary in that moment, that will never happen again. And if it does happen again, heaven help us, right? But it's an outlier, right? It's something. It's like getting struck by lightning. You know what I mean? It's something that just it's incredibly rare. It's really tough to stomach and swallow and understand why it happened to us. But it's so rare and such an outlier that I didn't think, you know what I mean? At some point, you just had to throw your hands up and be like, well, that's never going to happen again, so let's just move on. The problem with that Bears team, and the problem, I think, with some people in the media, too, as well, was they tried to turn it into some sort of Zapruder film, right? And it started turning into this whole, where was Tyreek Stevenson in the moment when this happened and all that stuff? And I understand Tyreek Stevenson was out of position, was unprofessional, was trash-talking the crowd before the play. The play is snapped. He's not in the right position. He's in the wrong, all that stuff, right? But the belaboring of it, the way that we sat on it, the way that we dissected it, the way that Matt Eberflus had to respond to it, I thought was the biggest red flag, and I think that's what punctured the hole in the boat of the Chicago Bears season. And then I think that's the moment, right, when we all knew Matt Eberflus wasn't the guy, but that's when we really knew that he was not the guy and the leader of this football team. The only player on that team, and let's just take away the stats for a second of whether you think he's a bust or not, but the 22-year-old rookie quarterback, Caleb Williams, was the only player really on that team publicly saying, yeah, it happened, we need to move on. And then the days moving forward when the media was asking about it, he was saying, well, I don't really know why we're still talking about this. We need to think about the next week moving forward. And the stench and the residue of all that stuck with this team. And really, it became this catalyst of what sank the team. So, yes, I do think that if they had won that game, pulled it out of their butt, moved 5-2, learned a lot of really hard lessons after playing well against Carolina, Los Angeles, and Jacksonville about coming back out offensively and having some problems. Maybe it would have, covered up some warts on this team that eventually were really exposed in the weeks moving forward about, honestly, Shane Waldron being a little too buddy-buddy with the players, a little bit too much of a yes man. The guys that they had on that defense, coaching-wise, were just not leaders, right? And in some cases, were – I don't even know how to phrase this properly, but, the Alan Williams of the world, right? Right? So the coaching, the hiring of the coaching staff was by far the biggest blind spot of this entire season. So yeah, maybe they had won some more games, and you could be right that it might be a blessing in disguise that the Chicago Bears were able to wipe this, clear house on all that. Because what if we had talked ourselves into the Bears winning 8 games this year? Would we have kept Matt Eberflus and kept that train rolling? Would we have kept Shane Waldron? It's tough to say. So, yeah, maybe these things work out a little bit. And this has been a funny story. And this is my final point is it has been funny that you don't, in the moment, we all ingest these things so passionately and sincerely. But my hope is that 10 years from now, we can look back and there's going to be all these different markers on this linear timeline of hopefully how the Chicago Bears got to being back on top of the mountain. And we'll look back and we'll be like, oh man, the Bears were terrible, but Justin was great. And that somehow helped that somehow helped get them in position where Lovie Smith then, as a big middle finger to the Houston Texans, went out and won a game, and it gave them the number 1 pick, which then put them in a position to then trade that number 1 pick for not just DJ Moore but other pieces, which then that future first round pick then turned into the number 1 pick for Caleb Williams. There's a little bit of some luck going on, the bigger picture fundamental luck going on with the Chicago Bears a little bit, and maybe as painful as the Fail Mary was, maybe it is hopefully another stroke of luck that finally they pulled the mask off. And it was Matt Eberflus all along. He was the problem. And maybe we got it. Maybe we got out of that. And Poles and George McCaskey, as you said, and Kevin Warren had to wake up. And maybe Ben Johnson is the guy, and maybe he is the person. This is the hope train, right? This is the hope train I'm working on right now. But yeah, hopefully now the Fail Mary is that weird another sliding doors moment of if we had won the game, would we have been competitive that year? Would we have made the playoffs? What would have happened? But clearly, though, I would still like to lean towards all the things that fell apart for that Bears team still would have fallen apart. I still think Matt Eberflus still wouldn't have known how to use timeouts. You know what I mean? I still think Cairo Santos kicks a low ball and their field goal might have still gotten blocked, stuff like that. But yeah, maybe 10 years from now, we'll look back and be like, maybe the Hail Mary was a good thing, as infamous and as painful as it is now.